talk today about Robert Koch. As you know, I'm a physician, but what I'm not going to talk about is tuberculosis as a disease. I'm talking about the technology around tuberculosis, because that's what the club is, a medical club. So first, what I want to talk about, just the nomenclature of tuberculosis. It's called Mycobacterium tuberculosis, genus and species. Myco is the prefix for fungus. Bacterium is obviously bacteria. Thing is that early on, when the taxonomy was just simply not understood at all, they're just discovering these microbes, they thought that the tuberculosis organism, as we know it today, was a combination of a fungus and a bacterium together. It wasn't, but that's what was thought. And so it was called a mycobacterium. It's a fungal bacteria. And even though the taxonomy has long since been figured out, somehow the name never changed. Many other bacteria have had names changed many, many times, but somehow Mycobacterium has stuck. So we can see the myces and bacterium. It could be intellectual, we put the Greek in there as well.
What are these pictures?
But this is a fungus, a mushroom. See, fungus, myces is Greek, means either fungus or mushroom. And bacterion is the Greek word.
Gotcha.
Word Latin bacterium. That's how we got those words. So, you know, like you're on the trails in Lexington and they got the sign that says where you are, says you are here. Well, this is where we are. These are some TV cultures. And you see them under the microscope. And as often as not, you have a monitor. You don't actually look through the lenses, you just look at the monitor. Or you can look under fluorochrome. And what this is antibodies are made against the tuberculosis. Then a fluorescent molecule is attached to the antibody, and then it binds to the tuberculosis. And you put it on this dark field, and the light is shown from the side, and so you have a black background. But the organism fluoresces because it's got this fluorescent dye on. Actually, when you look at they're a little more chartreuse than this, but it's bright against the black field, so it's easy to find. We also use the DNA probe. Now, a DNA probe is you take the microbe, you grow it, crush it all up, you release the DNA, and then you have put in the opposite, the opposing DNA strand that's man-made. And with polymerase, you multiply the piece of the genome that you're looking for. And then when it's multiplied a lot, you can find it. And that's how all gene probes work. These first came out actually for TB before all the other stuff came out. Or you can use high pressure, or also called high performance liquid chromatography. And usually chromatography, you just have a clay and you pour the stuff in the top and gravity takes it down. But with high pressure, high performance, it's a pump that pumps it through. So you can have a very, very fine mesh and get very tiny particles because of the very fine mesh. And here it shows you getting something called mycolic acid. And mycolic acid is a fatty acid found only in tuberculosis. And of course, the misnomer continues. It's myco. It says fungal fatty acid, but it's not fungal at all. They're not found in fungal. It's only found in TB, but be that as it may. And so you find the mycolic acid, and that shows the presence of tuberculosis. Interestingly, each strain of tuberculosis has its own group of mycolic acid, the very long chain fatty acids. So it leaves a fingerprint, which is shown here. It shows a fingerprint there of what the particular strain is. And these are read rather easily by eye, by trained people to get the TB strain. But there's a little variation. It's a bit of an art form, so it hasn't been computerized yet. So most people will work with the DNA probe because it takes a little too much expertise with the high pressure liquid chromatography.
Jerry, when was the name that includes the fungal? For the
1980s.
What was the name of the two parts that you did in the beginning? You had two words. You said
Bacterium. Myco means fungus.
Yeah, and when was that applied? I mean,
1880.
1880. Okay.
Because I'll show you some slides. It actually looks like fungal hyphae. It actually does look like that. I'll show it to you, but it just isn't.
I'll shut up.
So how do we get here? That's well, kind of a long story. So let's talk about a few more words here. Tuberculosis is what we call it now. It was also called consumption because it eats away slowly after people waste away and consumed by the disease. It was also called the Great White Plague, as compared to the Black Plague was, of course, Pasteurella pestis, because people the pneumonia turned cyanotic blue, but it was called black. And the lungs get these necrotic areas of tuberculosis, which are kind of a antique white color. So it was called the White Plague. And then we had smallpox, and we had the Great Pox, which everybody knows is syphilis. Yeah. That was also called
How do you know whether you've got tuberculosis or not? What are the early symptoms?
Well, let me just answer the question long form.
Okay.
It's called wasting disease, or in Greek, thesis. Yeah, now, in thesis, the phi, ph, is not pronounced. It's silent. As we say, like the P in swimming. It's silent. So it's thesis. And I was a thesiologist over at the old Middlesex County Sanatorium. So I'm a thesiologist. And people, not to get into TB, but I've seen a ton of it. I've seen at least 1,500 cases of it. Pulmonary TB is characterized by cough, some blood, night sweats, fever, and weight loss. Now, how do you know? Well, you know because you have symptoms. The doctor gives a chest X-ray. You get a sputum, and you look at the sputum, and you find the TB, like I showed you, with the various stains or cultures. Okay. Now, TB has been around for a long time. You can't find TB in the lungs of mummies because the lungs have been removed. So, but they did have TB of the spine. This is an old mummy. They took this is the spine eaten away by TB, and was formally described by Percival Koch in the mid-1700s, and it's called even today tuberculosis of the spine. It's Pott's disease. Now, here's where you start in with a scientific background. This is the science part now. Now, microbes obviously can't be seen by eye. And the key element of this whole shebang is the ability to see them. Because there was no concept of the microbe before you could really see them. So in the 1200s, Roger Bacon, which was not really a scientist, but a proto-scientist, had one of the greatest insights of all time, that you could change the size of an image with a piece of glass. And he drew it out, that you could take a lump of glass, and he had this diagram and how he could magnify things. That was a huge advance, just that piece of thought that he wrote about. Now you can see he's got a book here called, it says Tractat de Alchemia. Now those of us who took 5 years of Latin like me know that this is not a complete sentence. It should say Hoc Tractat de Alchemia. This teaches about alchemy. But a better translation, because it doesn't translate right, is Treatise on Alchemy. That's how you translate it. You wouldn't say he treats about alchemy, you say Treatise on Alchemy. And it's upside down, but that's the book that was reading. So they hopped right on his idea, and a mere 400 years later, we're right in it. Just blinding. It's just like now, the technology now, just blinding how things change. You probably shouldn't say blinding with a microscope, that doesn't go. So Anton von Leeuwenhoek is given the credit for the first microscope, but in fact, optics were being taught all around Europe and in Great Britain. And this was a discovery waiting to happen. And you can find other claims to have invented the first microscope, but the principle is the same. And so what von Leeuwenhoek did was, he had this apparatus here. Here's the front view, but the side view is more illuminated. Here's the lens, see number 3, that's the lens. And his specimen went right up on here, and with a series of screws up and sideways, he could get it right into the focal point. And he taught himself how to grind lens and polish them with great curvature. And he could get magnification of 270 times, which permitted him to see the very largest of bacteria. So he saw them, yeast and blood corpuscles. So that was the first primitive microscope. Now, the way they created a spherical lens was in its own way simple. It was all done by hand. You have a diamond tool here, and you fix the glass onto this plate here. And you gently scrape the diamond tool. And you have, say the axis is right here, see? So that will create a perfect circle, perfect sphere. Well, really circle. You'll grind the lens and you get a concave lens. And it's silica, you go back and forth, and you eventually grind it on down to the shape that you want, and then you polish it. Or that's a concave lens, or you can make a convex lens by putting the axis of rotation down in here, and then the diamond tool will swing the other way. So you get a convex lens. But it's part of a sphere, which is the important point, is you're operating off a radius. And
Are you moving or rotating the surface that's holding the glass?
Yeah, to make it round, no, the bottom, to make it right, to make it round, because it's going to be a sphere. It's not going to be it's not a round piece of glass like that. It's a sphere.
The same when you go in the other way?
Yeah. So they had it was all done by hand, and it just went around and around and around. And the word just lens comes from the word lentil, just in case you were wondering about that last night.
So spherical.
Uh,
Now, I wanted to have a little digression here because of how we make our diagrams. Everybody really knows that if you have light, it'll bend toward the normal. And then when it comes out, it'll bend away from the normal. But the shorthand, when people draw lenses, the shorthand is you just draw it to the middle of the lens and you deflect it down. Because everybody knows it does this, but it makes the diagrams mixed up. So now, how does a convex lens magnify? Well, does it really magnify? No, of course not. Here's what they show. Light rays here coming through. Here's one here, and it's bent down to here. This one's supposed to go through dead center. You get a focal point here. So your image will come on here, and it'll be smaller. So how in the world does it magnify? Well, they have all these bizarre things about virtual images, and there's all sorts of stuff that don't really make a lot of sense because there's no such thing as a virtual image. They're real images. So let me just show you what really happens in the eye itself. Now, first, I want to make a point. This is just a rectangle. And I want to show that the front of the box takes up a greater portion of the visual field than the back of the box. That seems intuitive. This is called, in the art world, it's called one-point perspective. So here's what happens in the eye. Now this here is, let's call this a tree for lack of anything else. The tree will be here. Here's the lens of your eye. Now technically speaking, your cornea bends the light as well as the lens of your eye, but your cornea is fixed. And when we were young, which was a couple of years ago, our lenses of the eyes were flexible and they could alter the focal point so we could see things back and forth. Now we wear bifocals and parallax because we can't do that anymore. But the cornea and lens are really the whole thing, but I just drew it as the lens here. So the lens will give you a smaller representation on the retina of the eye, but it's very close. It's the retina of the eye. If you put a convex lens here, it bends this light down to here. So you have a bigger image on the retina. It takes a bigger part of the visual field than here. It has nothing to do with the size of the image here. It has to do with the relative image that you would see on the retina. Does everybody follow that? Does that make sense? So that's why a convex lens magnifies to our eye. Now, here's the problem with the perfect sphere. Here we go. The sphere has spherical and chromatic aberration. Spherical aberration. Now, I put an object at an infinite distance so I can get these points all parallel. If you look up here, just by the math, as it bends toward the normal and away from the normal, this line is going to cross the median about here. This beam here is going to cross the median a little farther out. This beam here even a little farther out, and so on. So there's no single sharp focal point to a sphere of glass. So you have spherical aberration. Make sense? Make sense to you, Dick?
No, but go on.
It's just the way the math works for the bending of light. This light is bent down to here. This light is bent out to here. This light is bent out farther. So they don't converge all on the same point. And the greater the curvature, the greater the spherical aberration. So there are limits to how much magnification you can have because the aberration is so great, the edges are all fuzzy, you just can't see anything. Yeah, let's see what we get here. Now, we also have chromatic aberration. As light goes through, I just use a prism. As light goes through a prism, it's bent, but the longer wavelengths are bent less, and the shorter wavelengths are bent more, so they separate. They come out separate. So you have chromatic aberration. Everybody's seen this looking through a lens. You see around the edge, you see this little rainbow around the edge. That's chromatic aberration, the same thing. The more spherical your lens, the more chromatic aberration you're going to have. So now you're really reaching the limits here. And here is chromatic aberration, which is the same concept twice. Here's the red color is bent out here, the blue is bent out here, so they don't converge and everything's fuzzy, chromatically fuzzy. So you reach your limits. So what are we going to do about that? Well, here's spherical aberration here, when here's your focal point. Nowadays, we can do all sorts of cams to adjust the lens just to make things go to this central point. It's all done by computers, it's all very exact, and it's all great, but they did not have that technology. They were just working off an arc, and that's all they had. But they also had pencil and paper and mathematicians. Yeah, so Cornelius Drebbel.
By the way, that doesn't change the chromatic aberration.
It will too, the same way.
Same way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not quite.
Not quite, but in the same manner,
You can correct the lens somewhat to get rid of both.
Yeah.
You do different corrections
Yes, that's true.
for each one of those.
Everything's a compromise.
Sure.
Okay, and there are limits.
It's
So
like,
what Cornelius Drebbel did, because people really were studying this stuff, doing the math of it, he invented the compound microscope, which has two convex lenses. And over here is a picture of his microscope. Galileo bought one of them. Now this actually belongs to Giuseppe Campani, but he had the same model. But he was more interested in the telescope than the microscope. He just wasn't all that interested in it. So what Drebbel did was he took two concave lenses of different refractive qualities, of different thicknesses. But this one, I did chromatic aberration because it's clearer. Here's how the lens is separated here. He puts in another lens here to bring them back to a single focal point. So now you have two lenses, which means you can increase the spherical component of the lens because you can make your correction. And now you're cooking. So now, another way to correct it is to have create an achromatic lens, is to put crown glass, which is borosilicate, regular glass, here. Now, just as a side note, if you put in enough boron, you get Pyrex glass and you can boil it. It doesn't crack. That's another story, whole other story. You can have a concave lens of a different refractive index too, just to make that correction. And that's called flint glass. They add lead oxide to it. Now, the reason that's important nowadays is because if you buy a Zeiss or Nikon lens, microscope, it is crazy. They got a zillion lenses in it with concave and convex to get all these light beams to converge to a single focal point. That's why they cost so much, because you're not buying two lenses. You're buying a whole bunch of lenses. Nikon has more lenses to maximize the magnification and the curvature. You can't just have an incredibly curved lens. Get too much aberration. But they didn't have this stuff then. But so they had the two lenses, just two lenses. But the next step was oil immersion microscopy. This has to do with the concept of the aperture. You want as much light coming through the aperture of the microscope as you can. In this slot I have, here's the specimen, this little dot here. The light will be coming up from here to this little specimen here. And it will be going out, but by the cover slip, it bends the light here, not this way. So you have less light coming through. You want light coming from all different points to your second lens. So you reduce the number of photons coming in through the aperture. Immersion oil has the same refractive index as glass. Now they use cedarwood oil initially. The cedarwood oil, the problem with it, it's acidic and it eats away at the lenses. It's no longer used. We use oil, a petroleum product now, but it's the same point. Now you can get a lot of light coming through the aperture because it's not bent out. And you say, well, why can't I just turn up the light? Let me see what you next time. You say, why can't I just turn up the light and make it brighter? And that's because you get scatter. And scatter, you get Rayleigh scattering, which is when the wavelength is smaller than the particle. It vibrates the electrons and it comes off in all different directions. But me scattering, which is the wavelength is larger, and it's like shining light on fog. And the brighter the light, you just get more dispersion. You don't get see through the fog. And so you can't just, and it's not linear. So when you double the light, you can triple the scatter, quadruple the scatter. And so you just can't make it brighter. That won't work. So our friend here, David Brewster, the Johannes Kepler of optics, he figured out this business with oil immersion. And here you have your light source here again. And here he, with oil immersion, he put all this light through here to increase what's called the effect of the aperture, which is the opening. And then he worked out the math of it, which we won't spend much time on, but it is interesting. It's the resolving power of the microscope. And the terminology is the numerical aperture, because it's not only the physical size of the aperture, but it's the refractive qualities of the lens that's pulling it in. So there's math as well as just physical size. And the minimum distance between 2 points is called delta. So you want that number to be very small. So if you use a very short wavelength, lambda, very short wavelength, you can distinguish, like a blue rather than a red, you can distinguish two particles closer together. And likewise, the bigger the numerical aperture, the smaller, the shorter the distance you can determine. So you want a big numerical aperture and a very short wavelength. Just to read this, numerical aperture is the maximum diameter for collecting light as the refractive index of the medium between the slide and the lens falls, more light can be focused on a point. Numerical aperture increases, you get light from all different directions. So what do we have? We have improved resolution. We have a shallower depth of field, which is sometimes good, sometimes bad. And now you can increase your magnification. In good shape. Now, Brewster's contributions, just because it's interesting. He worked out interference, which is shown here, where light waves go by each other, interfere with each other. He worked out diffraction and polarization. He figured out the angle to get the light to be perfectly polarized. That's called Brewster's angle. And he worked out photoelasticity, which described the change of the optical properties of material under stress. He did a lot of stuff. He did a few other things. He invented the kaleidoscope. And here's a kaleidoscope. It comes from halos, which is beautiful, and ilos, which is shape or form, and scoto, which means to look at. So kaleidoscope. And he had the metal mirrored strips here, glass colored pieces there, and you turn it, and you get the infinite number of pretty images that you know. He patented in 1817, and in the next year in England, something like 250,000 of these kaleidoscopes were sold, about 10 of which were his. Nobody respected the patent. Everybody just made it, he didn't make a buck, he didn't make a pound. It was a miss. He invented the he invented the stereoscope, where they took two pictures and then they look kind of 3D. He invented that. But most importantly, he was immortalized on a cigar box, which has to be the ultimate honor for a scientist. Now we're going to get into more interesting stuff. The staining technology. It begins with a simple dye called aniline. Has anybody ever heard of aniline? There you go. Well, Dick would, of course.
Chemists.
Right?
Let me just go, make a point. You have benzene ring and an ammonia. That's animal. So it begins here with indigo. This is indigo. There was a huge industry in India with the indigo plant. And the indigo plant was the source of this blue dye, which would have to be shipped around the Cape of Good Hope or whatever, and all went back up. It was a big deal to get aniline from India. Suez Canal opened in like 1870 or something, and so, but it was a big deal to get it around. It's a big deal to get through Suez Canal too. So it was expensive. So in 1826, Otto Unverdorben, I did it the first time. Wonderful. I can't do it a second time. I'll stop there. He distilled from indigo something which he called crystalline. Who knows what? And then Runge in 1834 took coal tar. And what coal tar is, you take oil that you got from the ground, the oil from the ground, you filter it through wood. And you get this residue, that's coal tar. Some of the other oils stay up. And the coal tar is used for like asphalt and all sorts of things like that. But if you put, it's used for psoriasis, right?
Skin, that's right.
Yeah, psoriasis. I forgot that. I forgot. And he put chloride of lime, which is calcium and oxygen chloride. And he got a product which he called cyanol. Called cyanol. And then Frisch took indigo and added caustic. Well, that's what you get. It's the caustic potash that you put through wood. You put through water through wood. That's what it is. I said it wrong. It's caustic potash. You put water through wood, and then you evaporate what you get less, and you get potassium hydroxide or calcium carbonate. That's what caustic potash is. He called that aniline. And then von Hoffman showed that these were all the same. And then some kid, Henry Perkins, was working at von Hoffman. He was a college kid, had a two-week vacation. He had a little science project to try to synthesize quinine, which failed. But he was left with this blue dye that stained his glassware. Blue and magenta dye stained his glassware and his fingers, his clothes. And he realized he had to dye. It was a good dye. And not only did he stay in college, but he also went into the dye business, making aniline because it's very cheap to make. And he made his fortune selling aniline. But actually, the real business got settled in Dusseldorf, started making dyes. The Germans started making a lot of it for clothing. And the pathologists were very secondary. It was all for clothing. The clothing suddenly became very colorful. It was a confluence of king cotton. Cotton was coming from the Americas, so there's lots of fabric around, and you could stain in different colors. Now, one of the dyes that was made was fuchsin, sometimes spelled with an E. And it was named after, it's called rosaniline chloride, scientifically. It's named after the fuchsia flower, which is this magenta color. It's derived from aniline. And here you can see it here. Here's your aniline. See this, here's an aniline here, aniline here, aniline here, and in the center. And it comes out more blue than, it comes out this fuchsia color. So then the pathologist started using to stain tissues. The German anatomists, microanatomists were in the heyday at this time. And it didn't stain the tissues very well. But if you denatured the tissue with carbolic acid, that opened up more sites and it could be driven into the cells and stain them better. And then it was found that the carbolic acid over here didn't seem to bother the fuchsin. So they put the two of them together. Then it became one staining rather than two. And here's the stain here. There's the carbol-fuchsin stain, which is still a prominent stain even today. And you may know BASF. That was one of the first companies, Foundation, aniline, and soda factory. So kind of left a vapor trail. So now we're ready for off to the races we go. We have our basic technology.
What year is that?
50s,
Okay.
and 60s. Now, microbes could always be seen aggregate inside. That's a fluid, a water, liquid, liquid. But the theory of their existence, at least this kind of idea, went back to Aristotle. It says here Aristotle lived from 384 to 322. I thought he lived a lot longer. Didn't he end up marrying Jackie Kennedy?
A distant cousin,
He lived a lot longer than that.
Cousin.
Oh, is that not the same guy?
not the same
Oh,
guy.
we're not the same guy. Oh, okay. So there was this theory of the two theories that came up were spontaneous generation, that somehow there's a natural force, nature, if you have a broth, that life would just form. That was spontaneous generation. And then there was the theory of biogenesis, which it took life forms to make life forms. And those were the two arguments. We didn't know how this was going to come out. So John Needham did the first real experiment. He briefly boiled broth infused with plant or animal material, sealed the flasks, and after a few days, they'd both become cloudy, contain microscopic features. So he thought this was evidence for spontaneous generation. Of course, he probably just didn't boil them. So Spallanzani did the same experiment, but what he did was he took the broth uncovered, boiled the heck out of it, waited, left the top open, and lo and behold, after a while, a week or so, he had turbid growth. But now he couldn't have possibly boiled it with the top on because the steam would have exploded this vessel. But they put the top on at some point in this, and then it cooled and just left it. Of course, there was no growth. Now, so he said, okay, there's no spontaneous generation, but the counter argument was that that life force that does do it got killed by his boiling, which is a good argument. That makes sense. Well, it could be right. So let's have a contest. The Prix Alourbert, which was established by l'Académie Française in 1865. Now the prize was 2,500 francs, which is 485 bucks. But at the time of the American Civil War, people were making $1 a day. So 485 bucks was real money. Okay, so Louis Pasteur took the side of biogenesis and Felix Boucher took the side of spontaneous generation. You can probably guess who's going to win, but I'll show you how he won, how Pasteur won. He did a very clever experiment. First, what he did was he took a flask with a very long glass stem with an open, this is it, open-ended. But it was so long that air could not really flow freely in a still room all the way up that long stem. He boiled the heck out of it, let the flask sit, and no bacteria were present. Then he did the same experiment, but he snapped off the stem, left it, and of course, microorganisms grew because they'd come in from the air. And the coup de grace, being French, the coup de grace was he did the same experiment and he tipped it sideways. So this would tip down this way. So this stem was very short, left it for a while and tipped it back, and lo and behold, bacteria were present, showing that the bacteria just couldn't enter with that very long stem. And he won the Prix Alourbert. So now we get to Robert Koch. Now, I thought I was going to use ChatGPT to help me with this, but I'll show you why I couldn't. This is a lithograph I just got off the internet. And this second one is said to be a portrait, but I think it's a lithograph. Then I asked Microsoft Copilot, which has been behaving much better in the last 2 weeks. It's improved. I'm using it. And this is what I got from ChatGPT, images of Robert Koch. And they're really not that good. They're just images of a guy. They're not really representative. So.
Are these generated images or just found images?
AI images. I just give me an image of Robert Koch. Nothing more than that.
Yeah.
That's all I got. So it really isn't a resemblance in any sense. They got the glasses here. They got the scientific instrumentation, which was good. But really, it wasn't too good. So now, where are we when Robert Koch is getting going here? Fungal and bacterial structures they can see microscopically. It was unclear if bacteria were variants of a single species. There was no taxonomy as we know it today. There was a germ theory of contagious disease was being hotly debated because many people thought that all disease began in the cells, that you couldn't get disease from the outside, it began within you. That was a theory. But Jacob Henle was a German pathologist and anatomist. He was one of the major proponents of what's called contagium animatum, meaning that living species could be contagious and be passed person to person. And Jacob Henle was German, and he was quite. And Henle's produced a whole bunch of famous medical scientists. But being Jewish, they left Germany before World War II. When I was at Penn, one of the Henle descendants was a pathologist at HOP, Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, where I was an undergraduate. So there you go. It's a small world. And over here is the Seabird microscope that Koch had, and this had only 2 lenses. It had the image lens and the viewing lens, just like we showed with the 2 contact lenses. And here was your light source. Now, in those days, the light source had to be the sun, because who was it? Sir Humphrey Davy had invented the arc lamp, but those are too dangerous. And somebody else had developed a tungsten kind of light bulb before, I'm sorry, the platinum light bulb that was before it was platinum, before I think it was before Edison. But Edison was around 1880 and there was no electricity. He formed the first electric company in 1880. So even if you had a light bulb, you didn't have anything to plug it into. So they had to use the sun.
Use fire.
Then
Use fire.
a fire, I suppose, but you gotta have to light the mirror. Yeah, I wouldn't want to be doing that. You can do that. So Koch first began with anthrax. Yeah, I think it was 1874 or so. Wolfstein, Germany, wherever that is. Anthrax had killed 528 people and 56,000 livestock. This is a big problem. Koch was appointed the district medical officer around that time in 1875 to study anthrax. And he could see these rod-shaped structures, these black things here, because anthrax is big and goes in chains, in the blood of the afflicted animals. And he found that he could transmit it by inoculating healthy animals with blood from diseased animals. And he started using some stains to try to look at them. And what he found was that the blood from infected animals could be transmitted, but the older the blood, the more poorly transmitted disease was introduced. And he determined that anthrax went into a spore phase, which had never been heard of. And what he found, the pattern was, the animal would be eating the grass, get the anthrax, get sick, die, and they would bury the animal right in the field. Cows are heavy, who wants to lug them, right? You didn't want to touch the anthrax. So then the spores would get in the field and the next cow would eat them. And so they were going around. And one of his major contributions was stop burying the animals in the field, transport them, try not to get the anthrax, and transport them out of the field and bury them elsewhere to reduce the incidence of infection. Now, Pasteur was also working on anthrax and trying to attenuate anthrax. And now Koch was critical of Pasteur's techniques on anthrax attenuation. Now, I don't know, medical stuff, skullduggery. All rumors are true. You don't have people of good heart making up rumors of people about people with good heart. It doesn't happen. Either the person is making it up and is vicious, or the person is cheating. Okay, something is going on. So he accused Pasteur of using impure cultures and conducting faulty inoculation studies. That's what I read. And of course, the bell goes off in my head because I love this stuff. So I said, note to self, gotta look into this. So now, under the criticism that he was getting, because Pasteur was Koch was a big man. He sent Louis Thuillier, his assistant, to Prussia to demonstrate his inoculation techniques. And Thuillier, of course, was instructed to ask about Koch. And he wrote back to Pasteur that Koch is disliked by his colleagues. He's a bit of a rustic and is ignorant of parliamentary language.
Wow.
Well, Koch pronounced, Pasteur is not a physician, and one cannot expect him to make sound judgments about the pathological processes and symptoms of disease. Because a lot of jealousy going on. These guys are not just.
This guy didn't live too long either, this Thuillier. He was 27 when he died.
Yeah,
So imagine speaking about someone that way when you're 27.
I think that's a mistake.
Oh, okay,
I think I made a mistake there. Although I typed it in, I don't think, that doesn't sound right to me either.
okay.
Let's
Let's put it.
Now, so I start to do some little investigation, as my nature is. So Joseph Toussaint, he's a veterinarian in France and a scientist. And he developed strains of avirulent attenuated anthrax. It was a good idea that you can make animals and people immune. I mean, they're working on the concepts of immunity at the time. And he put them in potassium dichromate, which is pretty caustic, and he made them attenuated. They didn't cause disease. It's a little caustic. So here's an anthrax lesion, and here's just a picture of the anthrax. And he reported, now catch the year, 1880. Catch the year, 1880. Okay, so now, 1881, Pasteur conducted an open demonstration of his own attenuated anthrax bacillus, which he grew in cereal cultures. Often if you grow a bacterium in cereal cultures, so it's not attacking an animal, it loses the ability to cause infection, becomes avirulent, or loses a lot of virulence. So he made an open demonstration of his anthrax that he had grown in multiple cultures and became virulent, or not. In May 1881, Louis-le-Fort. Louis means the estate of Paul the Strong, which is about 25 miles southeast of Paris. He had a demonstration. He vaccinated 25 sheep, 6 cows, and a few goats with a weakened form of Bacillus anthracis, which is bad, and the same number of controls with virulent anthrax. And lo and behold, by the end of the day, all the controlled animals were dying or dead, and all the animals receiving attenuated anthrax were well. Okay, right? QED, quid erat demonstratum, right? Well, to be sure that his attenuated strain would work, Pasteur substituted bacteria attenuated by Toussaint's method using potassium dichromate. Cheated. And Emile Roux, a young scientist at Pasteur's lab, wrote in his own notebooks that he observed Pasteur applying potassium dichromate to anthrax cultures prior to the demonstration. He was using Toussaint's method. He hadn't attenuated them successfully, or he's afraid he had. Now, Pasteur had left in his will that his own notebooks never be published. But after his death, they were. And he has notes about using potassium dichromate on the anthrax just before the demonstration. So he wasn't entirely on the up and up either. So now let's get down to real stuff. First, Koch invented heat fixation. Now you must have done this, Dick, a million times in its slides.
Many ways we've.
Yep. Now heat fixation is this. You take a dropper, you put your specimen on there. If you don't heat fix it, it's liquid and sloshes all around. So if you take this droplet and you heat it up, here it shows a flame, but I don't know how you did, Dick, but we had a Bunsen burner, you had the slide, you hold a little tweezer-like thing and you wave it through the burner like this to get it high. Yeah, you watch it dry it out. That's how we did it. You didn't deal with flames like this. You can't hold this. This gets too hot in your hand. With the Bunsen burner. But then it sticks to the slide. It may give you a solid preparation. He invented that. Another first, he was the first microbiologist to use oil immersion microscopy. He was really into it. Okay? First guy. And he was the first one to take a photomicrograph. here's his microscope, and here is the camera on here. Great image of anthrax. He's doing work on anthrax now. And he did the dry plate emulsion, which is what they had. They had a silver bromide. This is silver bromide. And then you shine a light on the bromine, it yields up an electron, it gives it to the silver. You have elemental silver. And the silver turn on the, so you shine light through it, the silver turns black, that's your negative. So the background will be black, and then you do the photo paper and the background turns white because it's a negative, it's the positive. And this was an image of anthrax against some white blood cells. That was the first image of photographic images of bacteria that Koch did.
Jerry,
Yeah.
The image on the left there, so what year are we talking about?
1888.
1888. I'm just thinking about that
I'm sorry,
camera.
1887.
I'm just thinking about who made
Six.
that camera.
Before 1880. Before 1888.
It wasn't Polaroid.
No. It's a German company. Germans were they were up on everything. But my grandfather, he was a physician in Norwich, Connecticut. He went to BU Medical School. And he sent to Germany for this after World War I. He sent to Germany for it looks like a gun, but what it was a kind of a guillotine at the end of it, because he did tonsillectomies at home with his fine German thing, and I still have it, fine German gun. He could grab the tonsil, it has like a loop, he'd grab the tonsil, pull it through the loop, and then with the gun out here, outside the mouth, you'd shear it off.
Mhm.
So you could do the tonsillectomy very quickly. And he would go to a kid's house with another doctor. They had this stuff called ether. And the doctor would be the anesthesiologist, and he'd be the surgeon. And they'd drop it on cotton and create the vapors. And the kid would go out like this. And they'd open their mouth. They didn't have ammo bags. And kid go out like that, and they'd quick open the mouth, grab the tonsils, the white one, the left one, the adenoid, snip, and they'd be done, the kid wake up the kid. In very little children, the tonsillar artery is tiny, it goes to spasm, it doesn't bleed. But once you get around 8 or 9 years old, it gets to be dangerous. You have to be, it's a good question. You have to be ready to suture, and you can't see because the blood's coming out. It's a mess. So you got to clamp it. It's a mess. So you don't want to do it on older children. You really need an ENT specialist under anesthesia with a good grip on the base of that tonsil before you screw around with it and put a suture through it. Yeah. So it isn't like with little kids, it goes into spasm. It just doesn't do it. You don't want to do it with a teenager at all. So now, he also developed using solid media. He used agar, which you know, it was a seaweed extract in glass plates called Petri dishes. And the Petri dish was invented by Julius Petri, who worked in Koch's laboratory. And he made Koch the first Petri dishes, which are now called Petri dishes. And we all use Petri dishes. And Fanny Hesse, the wife of Walter Hesse worked in the lab, and she had heard of this stuff making jelly of agar from Malaysia. And that was the gelatin they were using before had a melting point of around 100 degrees. So if it ended up on a warm counter or anything, the thing sloshed around and the cultures got all mixed up on the surface and they washed in. It was a mess. But agar has a much higher melting point. So it was useful. You could just leave it. You didn't have to worry about the sun getting on it or anything. So the agar was invented in his lab as well. You realize there's 1 degree of separation between you and Robert Koch. Now, how many medical inventions made in the 1870s are around today? And these are in common use, which is unbelievable. This all came out from his laboratory. So now he takes on tuberculosis. And he wrote this.
Well, the agar is used because it's very nutritious for
Yes.
all the organisms that you're growing. So it's
It
not
is.
just because of the boiling
Right,
point.
right,
Well,
and it's
it
nutritious.
is very nutritious.
They'll come a little later. Yeah, that's very true. Very true. The same procedure investigation, he wrote this in 1884. He's talking about the etiology of tuberculosis. The same procedure investigation, which had proved effective On other occasions, meaning anthrax, was to be followed. There's an important point. He had all the tools for anthrax with culturing and microscopy and staining. He had everything all set. He didn't have to invent anything for TB. So now, TB, so here's what he invented, cultivation, staining. We'll go over these, isolation, inoculation. Now, TB in the cities was cause of death of like 10 or 15% of the people, a lot. And it wasn't just old people, young people, everything was always, there's the tragedy of the young dying with consumption, and La Boheme is, Virginia La Boheme, Musetta dies of tuberculosis. Now, you know, consumption is a very slow disease, it's a way at you. And it took Camille the entire second act of La Traviata to die of tuberculosis. That's how slow it is. So now we're going to go through this business of cultivation, staining, isolation, inoculation. It's cultivation. TB on blood agar, and Dick brought up the point that agar is very nutritious, but doesn't have a lot of iron in it. So sometimes they would add blood to it to give a little iron. So this happens to be TB on blood agar. And he cultured tuberculosis from the lungs of people and animals who died of consumption. And he grew out tuberculosis. And here there's just a closer view of the colonies. They're different, there's no blood. So then he began staining. What he first began with was methylene blue, which is an aniline dye. Now here is aniline. You see the aniline here, this molecule here, this part of the molecule here? Molecule, everybody see that? Those are the two anilines. So instead of being magenta, it comes out a blue. Methylene blue is just blue. It's blue. This is developed by Paul Ehrlich, who was a famous pathologist, did many studies in immunology. He invented methylene blue for Koch, really. Now, here's why I thought I was going to use ChatGPT about staining, about helping me prepare this talk, and I gave up immediately. I just pasted this in and added the main chat. What was Robert Koch's first method of staining? Robert Koch's initial staining method, this ChatGPT, involves the use of methylene blue. This was a significant breakthrough as it allowed him to visualize bacteria more clearly under a microscope. Methylene is the basic dye that stains the nuclei of bacteria blue, making them easier to distinguish from the background. Me, bacteria don't have a nucleus. Please correct your answer above. ChatGPT. You're absolutely right. I apologize for the oversight. Bacteria are prokaryocytes, which means they do not have a nucleus. Instead, the genetic material is contained within the nucleoid region. Well, if you don't know that, you can't help me. That's rookie stuff, right? That's rookie stuff. He doesn't know anything. You're going to go to a doctor who uses ChatGPT. Good luck.
Yeah, you gotta know you gotta know your subject to understand the answers correct or not.
Right, but I knew the answer.
And it's so nice that they're so polite when they say, yeah, you're
Yes.
absolutely right. They can feel like $1 million.
Yeah, right. But then I couldn't help it. That was it. I thought I was going to prepare that. I've got 5 minutes to prepare the talk after that. So now we're going to go back to carbolic acid and fuchsin again. Franz, because methylene blue stains every bacteria, TB, non-TB, everything. So Franz Zeil and Frederick Nielsen, you know these guys. Didn't you go to high school with them?
Beyond me. They were after me.
They're after you. So Zeil and Nielsen went back to carbofuchsin, and they applied carbofuchsin to a specimen. The long ones are supposed to be TB, and the short ones are supposed to be ordinary bacteria. Now, it doesn't really get in very well into TB. So what you have to do into bacteria. So what you have to do is you have to heat it up a bit. And here they show, so it's on there, the board is carbolic acid, and the dye is fuchsin. And they would heat it up, and this would be a little pot, and the steam would make this real hot, and it would drive the carbolic acid in. and fuchsin in. Now, fuchsin binds to the glycolic acid in the cell membrane. So glycolic acid isn't some obscure thing. That's where it binds. The methylene blue goes to the nucleoid region. Remember that? Goes inside. Important point. Now, I don't know what when you did these things, but when we did these, we used a Bunsen burner and a copper pot. Because house staff, I was in Boston City, we used to see TV. People come in at night, and the lab was closed. We did the stains ourselves at TV. So you made the dry slide. He fixed it. And then you put the couple of fuchsin on it, and you put the Bunsen burner in the copper pot. You had two sticks that went east-west, and then your glass slide went north-south. You just left it, and you got it steaming, and your Bunsen burner made it steam for about 10 minutes. And then the slide was too hot to handle. You had to take a little tweezer and take it off and cool it off. And then you would put acid alcohol. So it's alcohol, it's ethanol, alcohol with a pH of 2.5. And that would drive the methylene blue out of the the fuchsin out of the bacteria, but it would stay stuck fast to the glycolic acid. So that's why they call it acid fast. Tuberculosis is called acid fast bacteria because the fuchsin holds fast to the cell membrane. Then you put on a counter stain, methylene blue, which gets inside, but you can't see it. First of all, because the fuchsin is so vivid, and second, it's on the inside, and the fuchsin's on the outside layer, so you can't see it. It gets in there, but you can't see it. So the TB will be this red and magenta color, and the other bacteria will be blue, so they're easily distinguished. That's the Zeal-Nielsen test, which is done today for staining TB.
And that's used for
Somebody comes in the emergency room. They got a cavitary lesion in the right upper lobe, and they're coughing up sputum, and you have them hook up a Louis, and you smear it on the slide, you dry it, and you get the labs are in the back. They don't allow doctors to do labs anymore, but in those days you could. We were qualified in those days. You made your acid fast stain, and you looked at you put it on the microscope with the oil immersion in the back and forth. It's very tedious looking for the red ones that were called red snappers. You look for them. You found a red snapper, and everybody goes crazy.
and this is meanwhile you're handling infectious
It's
things.
not aerosolized. You can't get it.
You can't get it? Oh.
So the patient gets this.
You'll probably go into that part. That's a great story too.
Okay.
Well, I'm not going to, but my PPD did convert as an intern, if you ask. It did. So I say you can't get it. I got it.
I see.
I just converted my PPD. So anyway, but now you can distinguish TB, acid fast bacteria, from other organisms. And here you got now you see how they look sort of like fungal hyphae, sort of. That was this idea, maybe they're part fungus. So what you have is the methylene blue staining the proteinaceous material in the few cells, but the fuchsin staining the tuberculosis. It's not hard to distinguish the two colors. Again, this is just the same thing with the methylene blue background and darker magenta staining the acid fast bacteria. Now, Koch only had black and white, of course, for photography. So Koch, this is the photo paper showing the TB organisms that he stained with the Zeal-Nielsen, but they'd only be black on the, of course, on the picture. And then the technique of isolation. Now, specimens of TB taken from bacteria were often contaminated by other bacteria. And Koch passed them specimens to rabbits and guinea pigs to get pure cultures. Now, this is an anthrax picture. I didn't have, so when you pass through anthrax, you just inject it into the blood of the organism. So injecting into the rat would die. You get cultures out, then you take the culture, inject it in another rat, the rat would get sick and die, and you go back and forth with the rat, the culture. When you do TB, you inject it into the peritoneum, either a guinea pig or rabbit. To inject it into a peritoneum, you flip the animal over, you pull the abdominal skin up, and then you inject through the abdominal skin. You're in the peritoneum because the parietal peritoneum comes up with you. You inject in the peritoneum. And passage through multiple generations of rabbits of TB. They got the following rabbits that got TB, and then they're getting harvested from them, cultured it, harvested again, and gave it to them, showing the causation of TB. The other thing that it did was the rabbits and guinea pigs get rid of the other bacteria, so you get pure cultures of TB. That's how we eliminated them from the other, eliminate all the other bacteria. Wow, nobody had done that. So he got the pure culture, inoculated healthy animals. Disease appears in previously healthy animal. Koch then passed the disease to other healthy animals. Culture plate animal, culture plate animal. Now, others inoculated TB cultures to animals caused TB, but nobody started with a pure culture. Down the line, eventually got pure cultures. So he showed that was it. He had it. So then we get to Koch's postulates, which are still today. The microorganism, we'll go through this twice, but the microorganism must be found in abundance in all organisms suffering from the disease, but should not be found in healthy organisms. The microorganism must be isolated from a diseased organism and grown in pure culture. The cultured microorganism should cause disease when introduced into a healthy organism. The microorganism must be re-isolated from the experimentally infected host and identified as being identical to the original specific causative agent. If we look at this pictorially, the same organism causes the disease, kills the animal, you grow it out in culture, you give it to another animal, the animal gets sick, you grow out the same organism. That's really what his Koch's postulates come down to. And that's done today. And then, so March of 1882, he delivered a talk to the Berlin Physiological Society. At the time that he delivered his paper on the discovery of the cause of consumption, Robert Koch was revered as one of the greatest scientists in history. And here he's at the pinnacle of success, but he's just a drawing of tuberculosis. And he wrote, the elucidation which has been achieved about the etiology of tuberculosis will produce new evidence for evaluating remaining infectious diseases, and that the methods of investigation, which have been proven in the research on tuberculosis, tuberculosis, will be useful and essential while working on other infectious diseases. The microscopy, the cultures, the isolation, the transmission, the staining, he did the whole shebang. And he won the Nobel Prize. Sounding good here. And a mere 8 months separated the beginning of his investigations, August 1881, and the collection of 1882. It only took him 8 months to consumption, which had been the scourge of mankind. He figured out of course, he figured out with anthrax, but at least this component was only 8 months. Incredible. He got the Nobel Prize. You'll notice on the Nobel coin, 2 things. They gave him more hair. You see that? And they gave him glasses. Now, had he invented a method for getting more hair, he'd be even more famous. Forget the tuberculosis. They would give him 3 Nobel Prizes.
I've also noticed that people who get Nobel Prizes die about 5 years after they get the prize.
Okay,
Maybe
it's
we
like
gotta
that.
watch out about that.
But anyway, so when you're at the pinnacle of success, this is a life lesson. When you're at the pinnacle of success, the only way is down.
That's right.
Okay? So Koch took out a glycerin extract of tuberculosis, injected into the skin. He called it tuberculin. Injected into the skin first with guinea pigs, and then with humans. There's no reaction in a healthy human. Caused fever, chills, and localized skin inflammation in TB patients. And he posited that it provided evidence for acute tuberculosis infection. In fact, it provides evidence for any tuberculosis infection. He said acute, but any. And it slowed or halted disease. This was not a crazy idea, because he thought the increase, he jacked up the immune system. He thought he jacked up the immune system would fight tuberculosis and at least slow it, or if not cure it. It was not a crazy idea. And he promulgated this idea. In 1891, he was appointed the head of the new Institute of Infectious Diseases. Because of his lobbying, it was later renamed the Robert Koch Institute, modeled after the Pasteur Institute, Paris. He was very jealous of Pasteur having an institute named after him. And Koch touted tuberculosis as a cure for tuberculosis. He administered it to patients at the institute. The trains to Berlin were packed with consumptives seeking a cure. Tuberculin proved ineffective. In the same time, 1893, because you got to look into this stuff, he divorced his wife of 26 years. In that same year, the 55-year-old Koch married a 20-year-old medical student, Hedwig Freiberg. That was not even widely known until 1898. And it was frowned upon even in those days. It was thought very irregular. So people were looking askance at this Koch. Then in 1889, he developed an improved tuberculin, again maintaining his claim that it halted or even cured TB. It failed to have any effect. Comments started to circulate about Koch's financial interest in controlling the cure for tuberculosis. And the second failure of tuberculin, his professional and his representation that it was a cure, his reputation declined. Now, then he got into the Mycobacterium bovis controversy, you know bovis. So now there are 4 typical tuberculosis strains: hominis, bovis, africanum, which I saw one case over at the TB scene in Connecticut. Now, bovis and hominis, bovis mostly in cattle, are found all around the world. Africanum is really isolated to Africa. And Connecticut is only seen here in the Horn of Africa. And they cause similar disease. Then there are the atypical strains, which we're not going to discuss. Now, there was a bovine tuberculosis debate whether you could get it from the cattle to humans. In 1901, the 1901 Congress, London Congress of Tuberculosis was held. And this is what Koch said: I should estimate the extent of the infection by the milk and flesh of tuberculous cattle and the butter made of their milk is hardly greater than that of hereditary transmission, than that is. And I therefore do not deem advisable to take any measures against it. How to inspect the cattle. Here's Robert Koch on a junket that day on that conference. Well, he was rebuked by others, including Frederick Montezember, who was the Director General of Public Health at the Dominion of Canada. He pointed out that Koch's view was in absolute contradiction to 2 royal commissions. He wrote, the feeling throughout the Congress seemed to be that Dr. Koch's statements were made prematurely and upon insufficient data, and that, should they prove to be wrong, the amount of harm done may be incalculable. This is said against Robert Koch, the great Robert Koch. And Fadian, also from the Royal Veterinary College, rebuked him. That was quite a to-do in his day, because the skin testing of cattle and post-mortem TB inspection to see if the cattle had TB was starting to be done. The Congress was reheld in Washington in 1908, and he stuck to his opinion on bovine TB testing, despite mounting evidence of M. bovis as a cause of TB, warranting Department of Public Health herd inspection and pasteurization. There's about 2% of cases of TB with bovine, but that was 2% of a big number in those days. That was a real number. And Koch again said, I therefore consider it unnecessary to take any measures against this form of TB. The fight against TB clearly has to be concentrated on the human bacillus. He was way off base. And the International Congress rebuked Koch with its resolution that preventive measures be continued against bovine tuberculosis, the possibility of propagation to this man be recognized. So Koch was really on the outs by that time. But history can be kind, and Koch is now remembered for his discovery of the cause of consumption, major scourge of mankind, although not in his lifetime, that's led to the cure. His remarkable achievement took less than a year, since he previously established the basic techniques, microbiological investigation, microscopy, isolation, culture, transmission, his postulates. This is a drawing tubercle bacillus in a macrophage. This is Koch did that drawing. And then on a local note, the Battle of Lexington was fought April 19, 1775. If you look at John Parker, he's portrayed as a young man. Well, Captain John Parker died on September 17, 1775 of consumption at age 46. He was a sick man when he fought in the Battle of Lexington, died of consumption. So that's the local story. Okay, and that is all I have on Robert Koch consumption.
Can you talk about consumption, what we know about it now, about TB, about the bacillus, what goes on in humans now?
Well, it causes necrotism.
What's known?
Well, first of all, it multiplies very slowly, and it causes necrotizing cell death infection. And it leads high oxygen concentrations. That's why it likes to be in the lungs. In this world, it's conveyed by aerosol. If somebody coughs, they have TB. They used to have signs in the subway, "Do not spit." It was thought that the spittle of TB, if you stepped on it, you could get tuberculosis. True. If it's in the milk, bovine TB is transmitted in milk, and it lands usually in the small bowel and the ileum. Get ileal tuberculosis, then it spreads by the bloodstream. It's called biliary TB. And the way tuberculosis is treated is with antibiotics, by definition, exist in nature. The medicines given for TB, like isoniazid, don't exist in nature. It's a derivative of a early antidepressant pronizin. It's all man-made. So it's called a chemotherapeutic. It's not a cancer drug. It's chemotherapeutic because it's man-made. And so it's ethambutol, isoniazid ethambutol. Rifampin is natural. PCA, I think it's man-made, but I'm not sure. I think it's man-made. So it's treated with chemotherapy, which we would call, it's commonly said antibiotics, but technically they're not antibiotics, chemotherapeutics. Well, they're not natural.
Natural.
So therefore, antibiotics have to
they
exist
kill-
in nature.
They'll kill.
They don't exist in nature. If they've been made, they're not antibiotics, technically speaking. Technically speaking. So that's how TB is treated, and it's readily treated. When your PPD converts, you take isoniazid for some months, as I did. If you get breakdown tuberculosis years later, you take a 4-drug regimen, 6 months.
The reason I asked the question, because I came across, because I knew you giving this talk, came across a paper about 2 weeks ago, which shocked me. What it says is that most humans carry this organism in their body, if we've been exposed to it.
You do.
Yes.
Yeah, because what it is, it's contained within the
Bone
memory
complex.
T. Yeah,
The bone
okay.
complex, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I
It
want.
survives. It's not really a sport paper, it can survive forever, practically. And so, and then some people, it will escape and get breakdown tuberculosis. So early TB is either you're asymptomatic or you have a little cough and feel generally well. And then all of a sudden your PPD is converted. Like with me, I had no illness that I could write. And then, then there's no prophylaxis. Then 30 years later, you can break down from glucose complex into active tuberculosis, which is called secondary breakdown TB, which is the overwhelming majority of cases. Nowadays, the sources, people from Southeast Asia, people with AIDS, there's very little tuberculosis in the general population.
But we are carrying it, perhaps.
You do.
Most of us are carrying it all the time.
You do. If you were positive PPD and you never had isoniazid, surely there are viable organisms.
So when you get a tuberculous skin test, there's a certain number of false positives that come out of that. Is that the result of the fact that you actually have tuberculosis organisms and you just don't have an acute disease?
Well, sometimes you introduce other organisms in sticking the skin, so you get redness. A false positive is pretty rare unless it's an infection.
Well, it could be positive because you're harboring it. You might
Well, that's
be picking
positive.
that up.
That's positive.
So it's
Right,
not
but-
that's
yeah,
not-
well,
false positive
not a
means there's no
false
TB.
positive.
But it's not a sign necessarily of an active disease. It might just be a sign that you're carrying the organism.
Lifetime means somewhere in your lifetime. The term they use is exposure, but that's not really the term. you had TB in you and you overcame it. And only a small percentage of those will have breakdown tuberculosis.
Mhm.
But nowadays, we don't do that. We do, what we do is we take lymphocytes from you and stimulate them with tuberculosis antigens called the gold or the gold plus test now, which is much more sensitive. So they actually don't do PPDs in a first world country with real wealth. You don't do it. In a third world country, you can do it or not, but if you go to Ethiopia, if it's negative, it's a false negative because everybody's got it. We don't hardly ever do PPDs.
What is the treatment for tuberculosis?
Chemotherapeutic agents, isoniazid, rifampin, pyrazinamide, and the ethambutol are the major agents.
And these are all, how does,
The pills. To cure TB is easy. The reason TB doesn't get cured is because the people who get it are the same people with the sociopathy, they're alcoholics and the street people and the this and the that, or they're immunosuppressed, and they're not taking their medicines. It's really a whole bunch of psychosocial problems that prevent the cure of tuberculosis. It is the lack of tools to treat it. It's easy to treat.
In the 19th century, there were sanitariums for TB that were established in the Swiss Alps and mountainous regions. Was that actually really a helpful thing?
Was TB, if you lived in the city, because you got them the hell out of the city. But the air, when you have breezes around, the aerosolization, you transmit very little. And all those TB scenes were very beautiful. And great windows, because they opened them to let the air in, the TB, and it didn't transmit. There was a wonderful movie, if you ever get to see it, it's called A Brief Vacation. What it's about is this actress. Of course, she's a beautiful Italian woman. She's working in Milan, and they have her all grubby and working in a tire factory. And she gets sick, and she got a terrible husband. He's a brutish, awful person. And her children are just awful. She has this awful life, and she gets TB. And she goes to the TB sanatorium in the Italian Alps, which are like the Swiss Alps. And they're just so beautiful. And of course, it's a handsome Italian actor and also has TB. And they come up and they fall in love, and they have this very awkward weekend visit where the brutish husband comes to visit her, and then he leaves, and then she's back in love with this other handsome Italian actor.
help to the
And
cure?
then she gets called into the doctor's office. He says, "You're cured now. You can go home."
So she takes poison, and it's a sort of takeoff on Romeo and Juliet.
A brief vacation. That's what it's called. It's a
Brief
wonderful.
vacation, that's good. Look that up.
That's where all those Italian operas came from. All those.
That was a common theme of tragedy. It was everybody knew somebody whose kid had died of tuberculosis of consumption. It's pretty good.
Do you know
So
anything about the BCG?
Yeah, BCG is Bacillus calmette-guerin, which is it's an attenuated Mycobacterium bovis. And it's attenuated, it doesn't really cause disease. And it may cause a slight increase in your resistance to tuberculosis. You can find studies to show it's effective, and you can find studies that show it's ineffective. But it does convert your PPD, your skin test, and your gold test for at least 5 gold tests permanently, I think. But for 5 years, the skin test for PPD will be positive. So people coming from India have all had BCG. But they had it as a kid. So if they're 45 years old and they have a positive TB test, they come in, somebody gave you a PPD that's positive, that's a positive, because BCG only stays positive for about 5 years. Whether it actually interrupts the TB cycle is unclear, because you can find literature on both sides of the story.
So it only stops it for 5 years?
No, it changes the skin test for TB for 5 years, makes it positive.
Okay, because when I was in France, I got pneumonia, and I wasn't a North African immigrant, clearly, but the professor in charge of that wing of the hospital said, "Oh, must have TB," whereas had he been smart enough to look at the X-ray properly, he would have known it was pneumonia. My wife was told, "It's a good thing you're doing that, whatever. It'll be good to take your mind off of things in the sanitarium."
I worked at the TV stand for many years. Oh, Middlesex was very pleasant. Very pleasant.
Hey, that film was made in 1973, so it's not an
73?
old
Oh,
film.
no, it's not old.
And you can see it on Amazon if you want to go home and watch it this afternoon.
It's a great flick. But the CB sands here over Middlesex was just like, if you see that one, it's just like Middlesex. They're all built on hills. And they all have beautiful grounds. Now Middlesex, it was built like a T with like this, and then a T like that. And then they needed another wing, but they should have built a wing to make it like an X, but the workers refused, and they built another building, and it was empty, of course. And then they built a passageway to the new building, because they had filled the building with TB patients, that's what it was. Then they wanted a passageway, and they wanted to attach them, that's what we wanted to attach them. The builders wouldn't go into the TV building. So, attach them. When I was in Middlesex, one of the times they do the hospital inspections, Joint Commission was by inspect. And one of the wards, and we had other chronic diseases, we had Huntington's and whatever. So we go to the TV ward, and the TV ward has glass doors, the doors were shut, but they have a window in the door so you can see if somebody's coming through the other way. So we go up to the glass door and with the inspector, and I say to the inspector, this is where we have TB. Most of the patients have drug-resistant TB. He looks through the window and he says, looks pretty good to me, and he turned around and walked away. That was his inspection.
Oh, so I had a question earlier in the chat about this idea of you cultured TB serially, took it from one culture, put it in another petri dish, and that somehow attenuated it. So I would think that attenuation would only occur if there was something about that process that was essentially pressuring it to move away from the infectiousness, and I don't understand that.
It's called, in the olden days, I haven't seen it in recent days, it's called the Lyme hypothesis, which was that if you have a bacteria, lots of mutations, if you have a gene that is not used, that the genes tend to drop out. And so, because they have to have their genome really compressed because they're so small. They can't carry along a lot of extra baggage. That was at least the theory. So it's felt that if you don't use a quality, it will drop out. That's the idea of attenuation. Chopin had tuberculosis. When he was on Mallorca, he was coughing up blood when he was writing the nocturnes. And he was coughing up blood, and he could try to book passage, but everybody knew if some young guy in his 30s is coughing up blood, you don't want him on your boat. He had to go steerage with cargo, the cargo boat, to get back from Mallorca back to France, because nobody would allow him in. But he always was very thin and wasted. And what is this? Going through the chat here. Yeah, it was Louis Thuillier, 1856 to 1883. I guess that is correct. They recognized something put in Koch to turn blue, as methylene blue. It wouldn't be methylene blue, because if you have methylene blue, it comes out in your urine will actually not look blue, it'll look more green. You'll know if you took methylene blue. So it can't be methylene blue. Thuillier died of cholera. He died while working in the cholera outbreak, and after that, there you go.
All immigrants who come to the United States, are they tested for TB?
No. But to come in from Asia, I can't speak for Europe. For Asia, you have to have a chest X-ray. And in Asia, because there's so much cheating, when they take the film, they put your picture on the X-ray. So you can't borrow my normal X-ray and say, "Where's my X-ray?" We don't do that in the United States, but there's so much cheating. They do that in Asia. Now, what people don't know is it doesn't stop you from getting in. It gets you hitched up with the TB system. People think it'll keep. It did in the olden days. You were consumptive in 1880 coming over, they sent you home. About 10% of people who came over because they had mental problems or other things were sent back, and the consumptives were sent back.
When did they start to think about viruses as a cause of disease?
That was when the tobacco mosaic, 1930s, the tobacco mosaic virus. More important than humans is tobacco. And the tobacco mosaic virus was destroying the tobacco crops.
Mm.
And crystallizing the tobacco mosaic virus, I think was in the 1930s. And that was the beginning of the concept of viruses infecting cells.
So Koch obviously didn't know about viruses, and when he wrote his postulates, the idea that what you found after you did all the isolating and everything in the infected animal is the same as what you started with. That didn't allow for the fact the virus could have been mutating inside the infected animal.
They wouldn't be able to tell it mutated anyway.
Yeah, no. But a bacterium
It's
would
still the virus.
do
It's
that.
still the virus. You still culture the virus. It's the same concepts.
And the postulates still hold even for viruses.
Right, they do. They hold the virus. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.